Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be working on assembling our main spar. So just in case you're not sure what a main spar is, the spar is the major component of the wing that holds the majority of the lift that the wing creates. And it's really what needs to be one of the strongest parts of your airplane. But we're going to be adding several blocks to this to give it strength and rigidity. We're going to add in a tie-down mount here as well. And eventually, once we put skins and everything else and ribs in place and all that, we'll have a complete wing here that looks kind of like this. So these 6 parts here have to be bolted into certain places on the spar. We also have to add several bolts along this section right here. You can see this one in the back here that I've completed. This is the right wing spar here. The one we're working on today is going to be the left wing spar. I had to drill this hole up to 1/2 inch, which I don't do on the same block that goes on the left. This one here as well goes up to 1/2 inch. And then this main rib assembly piece here, there's lots of bolts to hold it into place here. And then if we come down here, you can see where the mount for the tie-down is going to go. Again, the skin's going to kind of go up this direction, so it'll have a tie-down on the bottom of the wing here. And then on this back side over here, we also add, so we've got the tie-down mount there. On the back here, there's an angle to stiffen up this outside portion of the wing. I think it's partially to give a good strong port to the tie down here, but it also will increase strength for torsional rigidity on the wing as well. There's actually another part that the instructions that we're working on says to put on. There's like a little angle that will go down here, and to that you can attach the fiberglass wing end that goes on there. We won't be adding that on today. I'm going to have to move some stuff around in the garage, and that's just asking for disaster. If I put that on, it's just going to end up getting banged up and broken. So we'll leave that off until the time comes for us to be ready to add that. Now that I've got a little bit more space to work, let's kind of get into this. These 6 parts here are what's going to be attached to the spar. It requires a little bit of machining. So this is for the right hand wing block. Since we're working on the left, this is actually this part over here. And the main difference between these two, if you look at the instructions, is this hole needs to be drilled up to 1/2 inch for the right wing spar, but and which I did on the other one that I completed. This one you do not drill up. I assume, I haven't gotten to that part in the instructions yet, but I assume that eventually we do have to drill this hole up, but we're going to drill it up to match this one, and I assume there's a big pin that's going to go inside of that to lock it into place. And that's the same thing with this smaller block here on the right wing. It has a hole that's drilled up to 1/2 inch, and on the left wing, which is the one we're working on, it does not get drilled up, so it stays the same size. We do, however, have to drill up these smaller holes here. See here that it says to drill it up to 3/16 of an inch, and also mentions to use a drill press to ensure that your hole stays straight. So it's probably in your best interest to do that to make sure that the hole is exactly straight. Again, this is probably the most critical part of your airplane, so taking the extra time to make sure it's done right is very important on this. We also have the tie-down ring fitting here. This will bolt onto the bottom of the spar, and eventually there's going to be a pin that goes through this with a hoop on the bottom that you can actually connect a rope into and tie your airplane down. This one right here is called the outboard vertical stiffener angle. Again, this needs to be drilled out to 3/16 of an inch and bolted into place on the spar. And these two fellows right here are what's known as the root rib attach angles. They go front and back across. So if this is the rib standing vertically, they're going to go kind of front and back, and that's where you're going to attach some root ribs to the front and the back. This one was probably one of the most difficult parts of this particular job. You'll notice here that it's so the main block that we connect here, the wing root wing attached block. This is vertical. It's already pre-drilled for the spar. These though, these root rib attach angles, they are not pre-drilled, and so you actually have to measure. You'll see from center to center here, 3 3/8 inches, center of this bolt to the center of this bolt. And there's also a couple of pre-attached solid rivets here as well, so you got to be kind of careful there to make sure that they are in the right spot. And then at the bottom here, though, there's a different size. Instead of being 3 3/8 between holes, these two are only 3 inches between holes. So it requires a little bit of getting in there with a ruler and making sure you measure it out properly to make it fit correctly. So that's probably the hardest part of this entire build here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get to work on the drilling of these parts to put the 3/16 holes in them. You may hear a lawnmower in the background. My wife loves mowing the lawn. I'm a pretty lucky guy. I get to sit in the garage and work on an airplane while my wife mows the lawn. I realize how unusual that is, but I'm grateful for her and her willingness and actually her desire to do that. Anyway, so let's get drilling these parts. Just stopping every few seconds here to make sure that it's staying centered in the punch, just to make sure that it lines up with holes on the spar. Just to make sure that it stays flat, I'm just gonna deburr these holes a little bit, so it doesn't make it crooked as I'm drilling. Alright, there's one part done. Actually looks pretty good. On to the next. Alright, another good piece. Looks just fine. So the next thing we need to do is collect some screws and washers and nuts. So we need the MS24694-S56 screws. We need 3 of those. They have a tapered head on them. We also need 3 washers, the AN960s. And then we also need, and this is something I'm a little bit concerned about here. I'm not totally sure about what to do here. It calls for 3 AN365-1032s. The kit does come with 3 of those, but only 3. I believe what they mean to have there is these 1032-As. And these have an insert, a plastic insert in there to make them lock nuts. And the reason I think that this is marked incorrectly is because, again, there's only 3, but this detail D is meant for both the left and the right. And it shows here that these are exactly the same, uses the same exact detail portion here for both the right and the left end supports. So these should be exactly the same, but the kit only gives 3 of the 1032s instead of the 1032-As. Again, the only difference is one has a metal stopper that acts as a locking mechanism. These ones have the plastic insert to lock it in place. Anyway, so I'm going to install it with these, and hopefully that's correct. Alright, so this block has 3 places to put screws, 2 on the bottom, 1 on the top, and it matches up the part here pretty well. There's actually a centering hole that eventually will be drilled out, just not yet. So we've got these taper head screws that are going to go from the bottom up, and then we put a washer and a nut on top of that. So with these AN3 bolts, they're not meant to be torqued down really tight. I think that they're only like 1.5 to 2 foot-pounds or something like that. The key here is to make sure that you're bringing that tapered screw from the backside up to make it nice and flush. Without over-tightening, of course. All right, with this mount block here installed, the next thing to do is flip this thing over and start putting in some of the other parts here. All right, so according to the drawings here, I need to make a mark from this hole, the center of this hole, and make a mark out to here, 3 1/8 of an inch. Let me just make sure, 3 3/8 of an inch. So I'll line up my ruler here at 3 3/8 right on the top of this hole, and then make a mark down here on the other end, nice and square from there. There we go. And then from the other side, on the bottom part of this, the distance is only 3 inches. It goes from this hole that you can't see down here, but it's lined up with this, to 3 inches this direction. I also need to do a straight edge mark going across. Alright, so I have a couple of holes marked here. That should be where these holes line up on either end of it. Alright, now that I have these two marks here where I think they need to go, use this as a straight edge and make a line between the two. There you go. So that's where one hole's going to go. That's where another hole's going to go. And if we line up one of these parts here the way that it goes, get this lined up, and you should see a line going through the middle of all the holes that are pre-drilled, right where they need to go. Alright, and then my preference for this is to line up one of these X's, just in case one of them's off a little bit. And then I'm going to mark it with my tool here. Alright, so I've got a nice little divot there. I'll go ahead and drill this out. And then I'm not going to drill the rest of these. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cleco this in place to make sure it holds where I want it to. And then I'll drill the holes based on them being in line where they need to be. What I'm noticing is that the top part of this is kind of bumping into the top of the spar here, which I'm not super happy about. And there's a bit more space on the bottom, even though this is supposedly lined up correctly. Not really happy with that, so I'm actually just going to pull out these rivets and I'm going to start from the bottom instead of the top. The beauty of this is that I eventually have to drill these up to 3/16 inch bolts, so even though they're not lined up perfectly right now, once I get them in the place that I want it to be, I can then drill all of the holes up to the size that I want. Alright, well that's one side of it. We actually have to flip this over and put another one on the back side of this as well. So underneath, opposite. So we have to pull out a few of these clecos in order to add clecos from the other end. All right, well that's in place now, well enough that I can start drilling out some of these holes to the 3/16 size. So we can put in some AN3 bolts right into these holes. Alright, then it's time to disassemble all of this and clean it up. We need to deburr it and prime it and then put it all back together. A couple leads that are in here tight enough that I actually have to unscrew them to get them out, which is, I think, pretty good. Alright, I've gone ahead and added in those AN3 bolts from the back side going forward. It requires washers on both sides, on the bolts on the back side and underneath the nuts on the other side. And now I'm just going to go ahead and tighten these up. They're loose right now, but they all fit in there okay. I'm just going to tighten those up and move on to the next thing. Okay, and for this root wing attach block, it requires 3 of these MS24694-5, S56 screws. They go up from the bottom up this direction. They require 3 washers and 3 nuts as well, which I have here in my hand. Alright, looks pretty good from the back side. Well, I've had to take a short break overnight. My Spar had an issue. It was built in the factory and there was a couple of rivets that were placed in the wrong holes. Let me take you over there and show you what's happened. So I have 2 more parts here that need to be added to this assembly. This is a stiffener angle. Basically it just gives it additional strength on the back side, and that's going to go down underneath here. And the other is this tie down block. This is going to be, it's going to stick out from the bottom of the wing here. This is the bottom of the wing, and there's a hole here that I'm going to put a tie down eye bolt through. Eventually when this is all put together. Unfortunately, it has to go right where it's sitting right here, and there should be 3 holes right here, 1, 2, 3, and on the top here there should only be 1 hole open and have rivets in these 2 holes. And so it looks like at the factory they accidentally put the rivets in these 2 holes instead of these 2 holes. So what I'm going to end up having to do is drill out these 2 rivets in order to put this in place with 3/16 bolts, or AN3 bolts. And then that will allow me to put this here in the back underneath for additional support. So one way or another, these 2 rivets have to come out before I can progress. And so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm just going to go ahead and drill out these 2 rivets, and we'll worry about these 2 later on, but we'll get this all supported and put where it needs to go, put this where it needs to go, and then it should be as simple as just adding the 2 rivets here, or bolts, or whatever it is that Sonex tells me to put in place there. I can just get this top to twist off now. Go. Alright, so the next step was we're going to connect this, what they call an outboard vertical stiffener angle here. That's going to go out here on the edge of the wing. This is the right side. Let's go up to the left side. The angle is going to protrude perpendicular to the wing, going towards the front. And we also want to put it in line with these rivets here, where the holes are actually already here. You'll notice that this only has 4 holes instead of the 6 that we need to have. I'll simply line up this hole here with this line all the way around. Make sure it's centered this direction as well. Okay. So hopefully you can see the small lines right down inside of that. I'm going to go ahead and drill those out with a number 40 drill bit and put in some clecos. Alright, the next thing to do is figure out how to get this thing centered on here properly. Then I can just line it up, clamp it, and then drill it from the back side as well. Alright, so this part right to the center is 1 3/8. Got ourselves a nice little line here that cuts this piece right in the middle. So we're just going to line that up from the other side and drill it through. Alright, so I have the tie-down block here, lined up flush here, and with the center line right in the middle of this hole, which I'll drill out now. Alright, then I'm just going to drop a bolt into the hole there. Another washer and a nut on the back side, just to hold that from moving around. Alright, so they're all lined up. Everything's drilled except for where these 4 clecos here are. So I'm going to go ahead and drill those out as well. Alright, well those are all in place where they need to go. Just going to pull it all apart and deburr everything. Give it a little spritz of primer. And this part will be completed. Alright, there we go. We got our tie-down block. It's nice and flush here. We got all the bolts in place where they need to go. The only thing I need to find out now is these holes here that were drilled by Sonex originally in the wrong spots. They should have been drilled down here. They weren't. I actually had to drill out these rivets and then put the bolts in place. So these were already drilled to the wrong size, so we'll see what Sonex has to say about that. And up here we have our root wing attach blocks installed front and back on both sides. And down here. Now I need to add some bolts to these open holes right here. The instructions call for AN7 bolts. The bolts go through the flush side, not the non-flush side. And then once you put these into place, the flat side of the bolt should be parallel to this end here, so that when you slide the parts together, they have clearance where the bolts are. So make sure that this is, again, parallel with the length of the wing spar here. Alright, well this one was a little bit easier to do than I first thought when I was looking at the diagrams. It turned out to not be quite so intimidating once I started actually putting the parts together. It does take a little extra care in looking at the details and making sure you've got them all right. It was a little bit frustrating to see the issue that Sonex had made on the part. Still waiting to hear back about what I need to do there. My assumption is just we're going to be putting in some AN3 bolts to fill in those holes where the rivets would have normally been. Anyway, I imagine this is all going to come together just fine. One thing I haven't done yet is there's some rig blocks that I need to put on the each of the spars, and you can't really do that until you fit the two of them together and drilled a couple of holes to get them centered and all that stuff. So that's going to be a different video, but pretty happy with the progress that I made today, and I guess I'm going to go ahead and end this video here. Like always, if you found this video interesting, or you know, if you just want to keep in touch, please feel free to subscribe. If you enjoyed it, you know, click the like button, and feel free to comment if you have questions or concerns about anything that I did. If you have better ways to do things, I'd love to hear it. Always like to learn. So we'll talk to you on the next one. See ya.